Travis Barker was easily one of the most influential drummers of the late 90s and early 2000s, and the drum tones he crafted alongside producer Jerry Finn were equally influential, largely defining the sound of pop-punk drums, an influence that can still be felt in rock drums to this day. And today we're going to try to recreate this drum sound, going over the drum selection and tuning, mic choice, processing, and more. And be sure to stick around to the end of the video so you can learn how you can get the drum samples I made from this session, so you can get these exact tones in your own mixes. I decided to chase after a take off your pants and jacket style drum sound for this video because that's just what I think of when I think Blink-182. Just a little bit more sonically refined than Enema of the State, but still the classic early 2000s pop punk sound before they got a little bit more experimental with the self-titled record. And for how massive this record was, there's surprisingly little information about the recording process. But between the little bit of info I could find, some hints and clues from other Jerry Finn and Blink-182 productions, and a few educated guesses, I think I got pretty darn close with the final sound. So let's start with the drums themselves. In this extremely low resolution video clip I found from the Take Off Your Pants and Jacket session, we can kinda see the drum setup. To me, it looks like the kick is from one of Travis's Orange County kicks. It looks to be a fairly small diameter, probably a 20-inch, which lines up with one of the main kits Travis was playing live around this time. It's also super deep, probably around 20 inches as well. For heads, Travis was known for using Remo Power Stroke 3s on the batter side, and it looks like the Rezo head has either 2 or 3 portholes in it, leading to a much drier sound. For my setup, I'm using a 20-inch kick drum from an old Japanese stencil kit with a coated Power Stroke 3 on the batter side and a large center port on the Rezo head. This should give a similar effect of drying out the drums as the multiple off-center ports on Travis's kick. For snare, Travis stated that on Enema of the State, they used a total of 12 different snare drums, mostly supplied by drum tech Mike Fasano, likely including classics like the Ludwig Black Beauty and Tama Bell Brass, and likely not including many Orange County snares, as Travis said that Jerry Finn hated those snares, saying that they sounded like popcorn. I think it's safe to assume that they used an equally wide range of snares on Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, so I tried a few out and ended up landing on a 14 by 6.5 Pearl Master snare. It's got a good bit of pop to it and just the right amount of ring. For toms, Travis used the toms from Mike Fasano's Pork Pie kit on this record. For our recreation today, I'm using my Pearl Studio Session Select toms. And finally, for cymbals, I'm using Zildjian A Custom hi-hats, an 18-inch A Custom and 20-inch A Crash, and of course, the 21-inch A Sweet Ride. For tuning, I decided to use the song First Date as a reference, as again, different songs use different drums and different tunings, but it was overall pretty standard stuff, with the snare and toms being a little bit on the high side, but not like totally cranked or anything. For the toms, I tuned the Rezo head a minor third higher than the batters, which I find gives plenty of punch and attack while still having a nice tail. Here's a chart with the exact pitches, drum heads, and dampening I used. Feel free to pause or grab a screenshot if you want to try this tuning out on your own kit. In my research, I found an interview with Ryan Hewitt, who engineered the self-titled Blink record, where he went into pretty deep detail about the mics and signal chain used on that record. And despite the fact that Take Off Your Pants and Jacket was engineered by Joe McGrath, not Ryan Hewitt, it's fairly well known that producer Jerry Finn was a major gearhead and was very involved in selecting mics and EQs and compressors. So I think it's pretty likely that there was a good bit of overlap on these two records. Because of that, I decided to use the self-titled setup as my starting point and work from there. On kick drum, they used an Audio-Technica ATM-25 inside the drum, about 5 inches from the batter head, just off center, and a blue mouse on the Rezo head, just a ½ inch away from the head and about 4 inches in from the edge of the drum. For my setup, I did the same thing, but swapped the blue mouse for a Shure KSM-32, which is a seriously underrated kick-out mic, by the way. The ATM-25 is giving us all the punch and character, while the KSM-32 is adding extra low-end weight and bloom. For snare, we're keeping it nice and simple with a pair of Shure SM57s on top and bottom. Ryan said that they placed the top mic as far in towards the center of the drum as they could get away with, and pointed it at a pretty steep angle down towards the head. And the bottom mic was about 2 inches below the drum, pointed straight up at the snare wires. Then on toms, on the self-titled record, they used B&K 4011s, which I think is the same thing as DPA 4011s. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that. But from our super low-res picture from the Take Off Your Pants and Jacket session, it kind of looks like that might be what they're using here too. Or definitely some kind of small diaphragm condenser. I decided to try the SE RN17s on my toms. These actually ended up sounding pretty cool. They've got a little bit beefier of a low end than most small diaphragm condensers, which worked perfectly on toms. For overheads, on the self-titled record, they used Neumann KM140s, but that's definitely not what they used for Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. I can't tell for sure what the mics are in this picture, but my best guess is that they're AKG C12s. To get sorta in that ballpark, I used a pair of Vanguard V13s. These sound awesome as drum overheads. In the photo from the actual session, it looks like they tilted the mics back towards the outside of the kit a bit, likely to try to get a little bit less snare in the overheads. I did the same, but still found I had a little bit more snare than I wanted for this particular sound, so I ended up putting the V13s into supercardioid to tighten up the polar pattern, helping to focus the sound more on just the cymbals. And finally, for room mics, on the self-titled session, they used one of those crazy binaural human head looking mics, as well as a Royer ribbon mic. I ended up going with a pair of Samar AL95 ribbons for my setup. I put them out near the far corners of my room and angled them so that the sides of the mics where the nulls are were pointed at the drums to minimize the amount of direct signal they were getting, making the room sound a little bit bigger. I thought the room sounded great with the setup, but the close mics were getting a little bit unwieldy once EQ and compression were applied, so I ended up pulling my giant mega curtain things halfway across the room. These are just 2 layers of heavy-duty packing blankets with a curtain in front to make it look nice. Opening these up helped to tighten up the close mics a bit, similar to putting gobos around the drums. When it came to processing the mics, I once again started with the signal chains from the self-titled album, figuring that if Jerry Finn liked 1073 EQs on snare in 2003, he probably did in 2001 as well. So for the kick, both mics got the 1073 treatment using the kit BB-N73, before being bussed together, hitting an SSL bus compressor, or in this case, the Brainworks Townhouse compressor, followed by a tape machine. I tried out a few different tape plugins for this, and actually ended up using the PSP saturator on the tape setting. From there, I felt like I still needed a little bit more EQ and compression, and since this album was mixed by Tom Lord Alge, the obvious choice was an SSL style channel strip. On snare, I once again started with the kit BB-N73 EQ, and followed that up with a DBX style compressor. In this case, I used the Over Easy setting in McDSP's Ultimate Compressor, before hitting a tape plugin. This time I used FabFilter Saturn, because again, I was using this as an opportunity to compare some of my tape plugins, so I just used whichever ones were making me happy on different tracks. Then the snare got a little extra EQ from the SSL strip, before getting some extra squash from the Kive Complex compressor. The Complex isn't based on anything specifically used on the actual record, I just felt like I needed more compression, tried out a few, and that one was doing the job for me. For toms, they used API EQs, so I went with the kit BB-A5, pulling out a bunch of mid-range and boosting a little bit of top and bottom. Then I drove that nice and hard into Saturn, and added a little bit of compression from the purified microlimiter. On overheads, they used Jerry's Manly Massive Passive EQ, so I used the Pulsar Massive plugin, cutting out some lows and boosting a touch of top end. I thought this EQ sounded awesome on here. It's one of those EQs that's like basically impossible to make sound bad. For the room mics, I started out by adding Liquid Sonic's 7th Heaven reverb on a room setting mixed to about 50% to make my room sound a little bit bigger, since it's quite a bit smaller than the live room at Signature Sound where they've recorded this album. I then used an API style EQ to shape the sound, before using a transient designer to reduce the attack and increase the sustain, once again making the room sound even bigger, before hitting it with a purified VU compressor for some 1176 style squash. And finally, I used the Pulsar Massive EQ again on the drum bus to add just a touch of extra sheen, before compressing pretty heavily with the Kive Complex, blended in parallel for some added energy and excitement. And of course, we can't forget how important Travis himself is in the sound. You can get all the mics and processing and tuning right, but without a great drummer, the sound will always be lacking. I'm nowhere near the level of Travis, but I did my best to add the power and excitement of his playing. But yeah, let's put it all together, throw on our drum bus processing, and hear the final drum sound. you dig this drum sound, I went ahead and made a drum sample pack from this session called the Barker Kit, so you can get these exact sounds for yourself. It's available over at bettermixes.com, link in the description, as part of the complete collection, along with a ton of other drum samples that I think you'll love. And by the way, if you already own the Essential Pack and want to upgrade to the complete collection, just send me an email through the contact form on my website and I'll hook you up. I have no idea how to do automatic discounts for previous customers, so I'll just do it manually. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. And let me know in the comments which drum sounds you would like me to recreate next. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.